In front of this. Yeah, it's okay. Are we on? All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is David Wilson, Dean of the Goldman School of Public Policy. Especially welcome to the people in the virtual world. Am I looking at the right place for the virtual world? Yeah, very good. This event is titled The Future of Public Policy in Higher Education, a Leadership Conversation. Before we get started, though, with that conversation, there are a few housekeeping notes that I need to run by you. It'll be an hour-long conversation, and we've already collected a number of the questions from our Goldman students in advance, and we'll have some time at the end of the conversation to kind of engage those questions. But we also have a few note cards. We still have note cards here for available questions, or we'll pass them around at some point for questions you might have from the audience. And I know the moderator will try and make sure that we get through as many of those as possible, but if not, we'll have about 10 minutes or so afterwards to engage directly in any of those. Please take a moment to ensure your phones are on silent so that they don't disrupt the conversation. And I have to give thanks to all of our sponsors, including the Center for Study of Higher Education at the Goldman School, directed by George Blumenthal, the Executive Leadership Academy, directed by Josie Baltadano, Goldman student groups, Black Students in Public Policy, Students of Color in Public Policy, and the MPAs for Justice and Empowerment. I also want to thank the Volcker Alliance and the Dean Summit for helping to create a network for our deans to come together. And then we've got a lot of logistical planning that's going on behind the scenes. And I want to thank Elizabeth Mart, our Director of Events and Programs, Jean Cheng, who's the Director of Innovation and Strategy, and Campbell Washington for helping to engage and coordinate with students. And of course, Monique Matlock to help with all the logistics and making sure I knew where I needed to be on time. So please offer kind applause for the team that helped put this together. So my comments are going to be brief today. So we're joined in some people's minds by our competitors. And we do compete for students, we compete for faculty, we compete for research dollars, and we compete for prominence. The question is, but what happens when we actually stop thinking about competition as winning and losing, and we start redefining what we're competing for? And also start thinking about, what does it mean to win the competition? Why are we in this? What's the reason why we actually engage? Can we be comfortable working with our competitors? Can we think about models that build resilience beyond just winning and losing students, scholarship dollars, and faculty? At GSPP, we believe that public policy, good government, and resiliency are how a better future gets made. And indeed, today's events are part of a larger set of activities that help us rethink our future. So our future experts, our future colleagues, our future as deans of public policy schools, and our future as individuals who all share a bit of a similar identity. What does it mean to actually redefine where we're going? So my role is to simply get us started. I will not participate in the panel, despite the best invitations that'll probably come up here. Our moderator is Michael Brown, a professor at UC Santa Barbara's Department of Counseling, Clinical, and School Psychology. True? You still down there? All right. Yeah. They haven't seen you, because he's also the special advisor to the president of the University of California system. Professor Brown is also a former provost. Show him the title. It's on a sweater, so it's official. Former provost and executive vice president for academic affairs for the University of California, and we're fortunate to have you here. I appreciate you coming and spending time with us. At the front of the room, you'll see Dean Roland Anglin, Levin College of Public Affairs and Education at Cleveland State University. Dean Nisha Botchwey, Humphrey School of Public Affairs, University of Minnesota. Dean Susan Gooden, Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs, Virginia Commonwealth University. Dean Ian Solomon, Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy, University of Virginia. And Dean Celeste Watkins-Hayes, Ford School of Public Policy, University of Michigan. Please join me in welcoming our president.
Thank you, Dean Wilson. And let me go ahead and start, because we only have an hour, so we got to get into it. But let me say I want to extend my welcome to all the panelists here. I'm particularly interested in listening to you. All of you have some kind of background in your own research area in social equity, race and diversity, inequality, or trying to bring people together around those issues. And I'm hoping that some of the comments and questions that we might hear from the audience might touch on some of those issues. So let me get into it, dive into the question. Maybe a first one, softball. Maybe you can just share your own area of expertise, what drew you into the field, and why you want to lead it. Is that all right? So since you're sitting next to me, Dean Watkins-Hayes,
Yes.
Maybe you can start us off.
Sure. Well, let me say good morning to all of you and to express my gratitude for being here and for the beautiful way that we've been organized into this conversation together. So I am a sociologist by training who also is an African-Americanist. So Black Studies background within a Department of African-American Studies for many years, soon to be called the Department of Black Studies. So in terms of my leadership style and what I bring is very much a kind of sociological approach in terms of observing first an environment and paying close attention and listening as job one as a leader. Number two, asking great questions and really drawing people out to tell their stories and to articulate their needs and their hopes and dreams and visions for themselves and for the institution. And then to be able to tie a lot of different threads together to be able to help us move towards a common goal. And then with my background in Black Studies, really understanding the importance of policy genealogies and the important ways in which where we are now as a country, as a world, has so much to do with where we've been historically, and being able to understand all of the different ways that public policy has been, in some instances, a force for positive social change and good, and other ways a really destructive force in creating and reproducing inequities. And we really try at the Ford School to work towards ensuring that our students have that kind of foundational understanding so that they know when and where they enter into the policy conversation and debate.
Thank you. And thank you all so much for joining us. And thanks to those online. Bring warm greetings from Charlottesville, Virginia to you this morning. It really is great. And let me thank Dean Wilson for putting this together. My fellow deans on this panel, I learned so much when we get together. And I think that, you're talking about competitors. I don't see any of this group as competitors. I think we're competing against time. We got a lot of big problems in the world, and we all, I think, are trying to get our work together to advance the quality of leadership in the world, the quality of public policy to reduce the amount of suffering in the world. So I don't really feel like your competitors so much as peers and colleagues and role models to learn from. So I've come to this work with a practitioner background. I'm trained as a lawyer. I've done work in the Obama Senate office and the Obama administration at the World Bank. So I bring some experience from international development, legislative policymaking, conflict resolution, particularly international, but also, as you said, race and inequality related. And I think that informs my work. One of the things that I taught is negotiation. I think my approach to leadership is often rooted in a negotiation theory, right? And those of you who studied, principled negotiation, right? Think about interests, not positions, right? So I bring a sort of pragmatism to my leadership. It's about how do we solve varied interests, right? Focusing on opportunities for mutual gain. I think we want more leaders to focus on mutual gain opportunities. Separate the people from the problem, right? And not let our individual differences and the personalities get in the way of solving problems. And focus on objective evidence, right? Using objectivity and objective. I think it's an important thing for leaders to bring. Certainly for those of us who take public policy seriously, trying to root it in good data, good evidence, discerning fact from opinion and fact from falsity. And finally, I think the last principles of negotiation is go up to the balcony periodically. Don't just stay mired in the problem. And I think all of us as leaders have to make space for that, to think about what's happening, not just in our departments and universities, communities, what's happening on the streets of Berkeley or Charlottesville, and what's happening in the broader world. So, great to be here.
Yes, good morning, everyone. It feels like afternoon because I'm coming from Minnesota. It's fantastic to be here. Again, I echo my colleagues on the panel. Thank you for the warm welcome. My field is built environment and public health. So I'm trained as a city planner with additional training in public health. My work is really rooted in my experience. And so I wanted to understand how the environment in which we live present choices to us that over time either cumulatively lead to positive health outcomes or negative health outcomes. And realizing that places we live, work, play, are born in are not often the choices that everyone has. And so public policy, public affairs, development practice, human rights, urban planning, all the fields that we focus on at the Humphrey School set the framework by which our society can either have healthy outcomes and thrive or unhealthy outcomes and simply try to survive. And so my work in public affairs and the work that we advance at the Humphrey School goes back to what our namesake and our founder wanted, that we create a space where we can engage in active dissent, dialogue, and debate so we can get to the right solution, not the easy answer. And that, I think, is something we should continue to talk through as we continue on the panel, because we're in a space today where it's the easy solution that avoids conflict. That's the Band-Aid. And sometimes we need to do a little bit of surgery so we can really set our nation and world on the course that we need to be on so we can thrive.
Thank you. Again, let me add my voice to the chorus of thanks. It's great to be here at Berkeley and great to be with my colleagues here on the panel. I come from a world of community and economic development. I come at it from the vantage point of being a practitioner and also someone who has an intellectual interest in studying the field. And what I learned about the field and what I bring to my leadership style is something that old organizers will tell you. You don't do for people what they can do for themselves. So that is one trait that I've brought over to my leadership at the College of Public Affairs and Education. The other thing that I've learned working in community economic development is an understanding and appreciation of human frailty. That's very important as a leader. In fact, that's how you push the ball forward, how you can help people become more than they think they can become. Lastly, the value of building institutions that last, both in communities and society at large. So quite a bit to learn from community economic development. So thank you.
Well, good morning, and a special thanks to Dean Wilson for convening this, and thanks to all of you for, because it's a beautiful day outside. You have plenty of things that you could be doing, but you've selected to be here with us, and we're immensely thankful. I bring you greetings from the L. Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs at Virginia Commonwealth University. We are, of course, named for the Honorable Governor Wilder, who is the first elected African-American governor in the nation. And at the age of 93, continues to be very active and viable in public policy. If you were to walk in today, you'd think maybe he's 50. So he hasn't told me the secret to the fountain of youth yet, but I'm hoping that maybe in a few more years I'll learn it. You know, my own background is in the area of public administration. And so I've done a lot of research in terms of social equity, particularly in terms of government institutions and understanding that historical context and policies of the past and how that influences their contemporary approaches to policy and to their practices. I also have done a fair amount of work over the years for an organization, nonpartisan research organization, MDRC, and have done a lot of work in the implementation studies area. And that's always been fascinating to me because we have a program and then we look at the outcomes at the end and then we sort of make some assumptions about how it was implemented. And I think actually that black box of implementation is some of the most interesting. In terms of my leadership style, I would say it was influenced quite a bit by a woman who's now deceased now, Grace Harris, Dr. Harris, who was the first African-American provost at Virginia Commonwealth University. She was originally denied admission to VCU, has a very interesting story. Then she got hired in the social work faculty, became dean, and ultimately provost. And I wrote a chapter with a colleague on a lot of her leadership styles and principles that I still abide by today, because I did have the opportunity to work with her before she passed. But I think the one that sticks out the most to me is listen and decide. That when you're in a role of leadership, that listening is critically important, and you must take in those perspectives and weigh them carefully. But at the end of the day, you are responsible for making some decisions, and sometimes they're difficult decisions or complex decisions. And so I think that principle of listen and decide is one that I try to carry with me. So looking forward to the discussion. Thank you again.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opening remarks. Quite illuminating. Now I'm going to get into some things that are a little more difficult. I think we all understand that race matters. Social construction, though it is, seems to matter. And it seems to be ubiquitous with respect to almost any area of public policy we could identify as at least a feature that needs to be, well, maybe doesn't need to be addressed, because in so many areas it isn't, but maybe should be addressed. What makes then, because I was looking at some of the questions coming from some of the students who seem to have this awareness, what makes then anti-racism such a potentially or seemingly intractable problem for public policy to address? Would love your insights about that, and maybe what we can do about that to make it less so. Maybe we'll start with, can I start at the end there? Dean Gooden.
Absolutely, thank you. Well, in my mind, race and social equity is a nervous area of government. And I have said that and actually written quite a bit on that. And I really think when you unpack that, the notion of the caste system in the United States dates back prior to 1776. It goes all the way back to the 14 colonies when slavery was legal even then. And so when our governmental institutions developed and we had this, legal segregation laws that were enforced by the courts, by the Supreme Court, in terms of what does it even mean to be white and the privileges that are associated with whiteness. All of those things have taken place now for centuries. And then we have the difficult task of trying to act that back. And so to me, I think that's what makes it intractable, is because we've got this long historical context. We've got these values that we say liberty and justice for all people being created equal. But then our policies and our practices don't live up to that vision. And so I think what the challenge is, how do we close that gap? And I think we can think in many ways of how we have closed the gap and how we continue to do so. But it's ingrained in our society. And I think by learning that history, we learn more about the public policies that we take for granted today, and how we need to reverse those so that we actually do implement equity.
I certainly agree with everything that Dean Gooden has said. Race is one of those it's an interesting phenomenon. How do you solve for it? Well, you don't. In the American milieu, what you try and do is figure out how to address it through public policy. And unfortunately, it keeps coming up like whack-a-mole. For every generation, you have to try and figure out how to deal with the issue of race. I don't have a solution for it, but what you can do is try and address it through the institutional forms of public policy. You try and dismantle racial segregation. You just try and dismantle barriers to workforce entry for young African-American males. But it's one of those things that is very, very difficult because it's in the hearts of people. It's a continuing effort, it always will be.
Thank you. So my thoughts are absolutely aligned here. What I would add maybe is a different perspective. And it's that when we think about issues of race and injustice, we're often looking at the population of Black and Brown people and not going to what Dean Gooden noted, the issues of privilege and compound privilege in white communities and in wealthy communities. Nicole Hannah-Jones was our speaker, our distinguished Carlson lecturer this past December at the University of Minnesota. And one of the things she highlighted is that her work and many of our work moves to advance and make more visible and present the pain of the history that Black people in America in particular and across the world, but in America in particular, realized. And the push against this, and perhaps why this is so intractable, is that there's such an effort to silence that history. We see that in Florida, we see that in Ohio, we see that in a few other places. And so part of the challenge here is that we're not looking at the whole problem. We're looking at the individual group that is harmed and not considering the group that is privileged over generations and the compound of that privilege that is playing out in a way that is systematic. And so Ed Getz, one of my faculty, writes about this and has done fantastic work that allows us to take this new view that's more comprehensive.
Thank you. I agree with what my colleagues have said. There's a joke told by David Foster Wallace. So two young fish are swimming along and an older fish passes by and says, "How's the water, boys?" And the fish keeps swimming along, and then one turns to the other and says, "What the heck is water?" I think this racial caste system is the water we swim in. And it's so deeply baked into all of our institutions and assumptions, and literature and culture, we don't even realize we're swimming in toxic, polluted, racial caste waters. So I think it's so intractable because it's so deep, we're not even aware of it. I think part of the work is one of just building our awareness, really trying to make us aware that we are swimming in polluted water. And then if we want to evolve out of this water, we got to figure out how we grow lungs to breathe on air. We might actually need to evolve these institutions so that they can exist in a different world because we're so dependent, and so much of our economy and our global policy is dependent on a hierarchical ranking of human lives and devaluing of many of them.
I agree with everything that's been said, and where I would take the conversation is it raises the question of, so what's the role of policy education in this? And I think that all of our schools have been in a process of having that discussion and debate, whether it's through the events and who we bring in, which I think is a really important resource, to what our faculty and student body and staff look like and the diverse experiences that they bring, but also what's happening in the classroom. And in some ways that classroom component is the most challenging because we're trained in different frameworks, and ensuring that we're meeting the moment requires us to be flexible and to have a growth mindset in terms of what we do in the classroom. So some of the things that we talk about at the Ford School is race cannot just be the variable in our statistical models that we teach our students, right? So we really need to ensure that we're thinking about the historical and sociological and political context that brings us to a particular policy that we're analyzing or we're teaching students to analyze. To really think about, once we've done the analysis, how do we think about equitable solutions and what they would look like for different communities and different populations, and being respectful of those divergent experiences. So the way that we're trying to do that is really leaning into the power of interdisciplinarity and not just bringing scholars together who have different backgrounds, but really putting ourselves in conversation together through that. So we have a Racial Foundations and Public Policy lecture series, and Rucker Johnson, one of your amazing faculty, was one of the speakers, and we talked about education policy. And we use that video in our conversations within Ford School to think about, well, how are we teaching, whether it's education or housing or economic policy, and to try to build on all of those different tools that we have at our disposal. Who are the faculty, students, and staff? What events are we doing? What does our curriculum look like? And putting those things in conversation with each other, because it's not going to take just one thing to offer a policy education that is truly responsive to all of the different dynamics that we just talked about.
How to address it. Maybe we can focus on educational inequity. That, because when we're talking about inequity, right, we mean that different groups of people experience different quality of education, and that there is an investment. There are structures of privilege going, I think, a point that was alluded to by Dr. Botchwey and Dr. Dean Gooden. There's an investment in that inequity. How do we step back from the balcony, maybe, and look at how to address that from a public policy point of view? Because I think this is an area that I care a lot about, some of you know. And we can try to address it, but how might we better address this to bring all peoples who have a vested interest, one way or another on this, together into something that works better for the society as a whole? Maybe that's Pollyannish, maybe that's Quixotean, but I'd like you to hear your thoughts about that. And I see you writing, Dean Botchwey. I was going to start with you. Can I start with you, or?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm going to start with an example, and then I'll have my colleagues provide the framing. So I lived in Atlanta for 10 years, and we have a fantastic school system there. When we moved to Atlanta, I had young kids and they were going into the Atlanta public schools, and we tried to find the right school for them. The first semester didn't work so well, but we applied to Drew Charter School, Charles Drew Charter School. It's part of the purpose-built schools or purpose-built communities framework. It's a fantastic framework. And the school they attended, Drew Charter, the neighborhood was referred to as Little Vietnam. So when Mayor Franklin was mayor, as the story goes, she would drive through, and others would drive through, not just Mayor Franklin. And if no one was coming, we would just keep going. If it was a stoplight, it was just that dangerous. And the way they transformed education for that community was not just a focus on the school. They built an entire community. It wasn't just making sure that the kids had the right reading, writing, and arithmetic, but that there's a grocery store that their parents could get to, that the housing is safe, that there's easy transit to work, that there's banks and not payday lenders accessible nearby. It's a community approach. So if my son Andrew is unable to learn in school, it may not be that it's that his math teacher isn't teaching the right way. It may be that he is unable to focus because it's too noisy at home, or he's hungry, or there's a health issue with grandma and he's concerned. So the way we deal with education is not educational disparities, is not that we focus on providing the training, that intervention with the education. We think about the whole child. the whole system and what we need to succeed on the whole. And so I would think the work we do by way of policy needs to look at a systems view and not an individual view.
At first, I wanted to go back to the previous question to say, I actually feel like racism can be very easily solved. It only requires societal will. The problem is getting that will there. And when I think back, we all think about the experience of the pandemic. And I remember I was speaking with one of the students here right before, and she was telling me she was working on her professional portfolio. And I advised some students before I was dean, and I was teaching our capstone, and they had to do telemedicine, telehealth. And, you know, the verdict back then was we're at least 10 years away from, you know, telehealth because of all the rules and regulations and all that. Well, here comes the pandemic, and we have telehealth, we have telemedicine. I mean, look at how many changes happened over such a quick period of time because there was societal will to do so. If we had that same level of societal will to defeat racism, racism could be gone tomorrow. So it's not really a political question, it's a societal question. Politicians don't lead, they follow. And so if we people say racism is out, you know, politicians will follow that message. The question is, do we as a society have that will? In terms of education, to me, I think we're in the midst of a huge storm relative to education in this country that is quite alarming. You know, we did a poll at the Wilder School, this is only of Virginians, and 53% of those polled said that college, a four-year college degree, was not worth the investment. 53%, that's a majority. When we have asked that question in previous polls, it has never gone over 30%. Those who felt so much strongly were those between the ages of 35 and 55 who are most likely to have kids who are getting ready to go to college. So if we don't, as a society, value education, another, I think, point of compelling evidence was just last month when the governor of Pennsylvania, his first executive order was to say that a four-year college degree is no longer required for 92% of state government jobs, 92%. So when you have individuals as a society, when we're saying we're taking a pass on education, you know, that in and of itself is huge, because when we think about us and our world standing, you know, other countries that are saying, let's back from education, most are trying to go the other way. So I think that's problematic in itself, and that's our hugest educational challenge.
Well, as I like to say, post-secondary attainment is the new economic development. And what we are seeing across the country are new ways of trying to promote post-secondary attainment. From Newark, New Jersey to Cincinnati, Ohio to Cleveland, Ohio, people are taking the reins. People are saying, how can we build new forms of collective impact through getting people together, different sectors, to address the key issue of young people going through the system and making it. It takes connections of institutions, connecting the sectors, building a whole new ecology that promotes post-secondary attainment. Can it be done? It is being done. And is it perfect? No, it's not. But it does offer a ray of hope to those of us who believe that you really do need to have an educated society for the future.
I think all of that is so important. And I think part of our charge is helping people see the value add of higher education. So we all happen to come from public institutions, and so much of the conversation that I think that we have internally, but I know the other schools have, is what is our value add, not only to what we're delivering to the students, but also what we're delivering to our local cities, to the state, and to the larger national and even global context. And sometimes we're not always great at telling our own story in terms of what we contribute and the importance of the idea of, if you're thinking about a government workforce that is not experienced higher education, you're talking about a workforce where critical thinking skills, advanced mathematical skills, writing skills, and the opportunity to interact with people who are not like them, because most K through 12 schools, as we know, are quite segregated, given neighborhood segregation. All of those things are lost without a more educated workforce. And too often that debate gets simmered down to, well, given the cost and the price tag, that's the issue, and that's why it's not worth it. And we've got to think about first college affordability, but also thinking about this question of helping people understand what they lose, not just at the individual level, but at the societal, at the community level, when we downgrade and de-emphasize and deprioritize higher education.
How many of you have filled out a FAFSA form recently? It's hard. And this is a very educated room. It's hard for educated parents with time, with access to resources, information to help their kids get from not just getting accepted into college, but then actually showing up. One of our colleagues at the Baton School did a lot of work on the kids who get lost in this transition, who should go, could go, and don't. And I agree on the societal will. I don't think it's that people are decided changing their attitudes because they don't see the value that we talk about. I think it's that we put up barrier upon barrier upon barrier. It's much harder to do, and intentionally oftentimes. And I think that, the societal change we have to make is deciding that it's worth investing in young lives and find ways to reduce barriers, remove barriers, and find the behavioral interventions to get kids to take that next step and help their parents. I think there's some responsibility, even though we are all public school deans here, public universities that have been starved increasingly of resources. We have to figure out, what are we going to do to make college easier for people and more affordable people, more accessible? That's one of the priorities for the Baton schools. We know we're an expensive place. And I don't think there has to be that trade-off. Then we can be excellent. We can use technology. We can find ways to find students where they are, to provide more opportunities for people who are working full-time to get educated. We can use all this great technology we learned how to use during COVID to reach people who otherwise can't afford to spend 2 or more years, 4 years, in generally fairly elite environments, even at public schools, studying. So I think that's going to be an important thing, is the responsibility we take. And again, it is baked in, right? Our tax system has created a winner-take-all educational funding model, right? Which is not serving the American people. And we have to decide, okay, if our systems and our laws are not serving us, how do we want to change them?
If I could just add one more bit, and that is, going back to Dean Gooden's comment about society's will to create change, our move to respond quickly to COVID and adopt technology. If we think about what innovations we might be able to adopt to decrease the burden on teachers. So you're a teacher, you have children coming into your classroom, and you know that 5 or 6 are absent all the time, but you have to start class. You have 5 minutes in between. You're busy afterwards because you're prepping for the next day. You didn't have a chance to call those 20 parents or to send a note. There are innovations that have been created that address that. So we're moving in the direction to decrease burden on teachers, to help parents know what's happening with their children in the classroom, to use nudge theory to promote the good and to help redirect the negative. The point here is that we can create change by way of educational outcomes. We just have to have the will and employ technological approaches, social approaches, and other approaches to this problem, in addition to, going to another point, maybe the rules are changed. The water we're swimming in needs to change, and we have a significant change in how we approach education. So all children, all babies can be educated in a way that allows them not just to have the skills they need, but to know that it's valuable as they move into the next levels of their experience.
As I listen to y'all, I say, this is a wonderful area of collaboration among these schools if y'all wanted to do it. Didn't pay me for that, but I just thought I thought I'd mention. That's just free. Now, given what the riches that I'm hearing from y'all, I got an easier question, but I'm going to take notes on this, and others of us might too. I want to know what is informing you. What books do y'all have sitting on your bedside table that you're reading and you think the rest of us ought to be reading? Got my pen here. It could be a book you wrote too. It's all right.
So I will, it's interesting because I try to read one kind of historical book that really, helps grounding in context. So I'm reading a Pulitzer Prize winning autobiography on Frederick Douglass. And then I'll mention my own book as well, Remaking a Life, because that's always on my nightside table, not because I read it every night, but because it helps to remind me why I do the work. So I write about women living with HIV, and I write about the role of the safety net and the historical safety net that has been built for people living with HIV. And if you know that history, you know how intractable the HIV/AIDS epidemic was in the early 80s and the numbers of deaths. You knew that it was considered a death sentence. The scientific progress felt impossible and slow. And the services and support system for people living with HIV was non-existent. And there was actually a real desire not to lean into this issue because of the disproportionate impact of the epidemic on LGBTQ plus communities, Black and Brown communities, low-income communities, and we know folks who live in that intersectional space, not prioritized in policy conversations. And yet, through the activism of individuals, through coalition building, through people learning and understanding how systems worked and pushing aggressively against that, and through ensuring that all of those engines of science and policy and social support institutions started to move, we have essentially remade, if you will, that epidemic, and HIV is now a manageable chronic illness. So I keep that book on my nightstand alongside the Frederick Douglass biography that I'm reading to remember that there is a long arc to policy change. And but the arc is not going to move unless we can be very effective and energetic agents of policy change. So that's what's on my nightstand.
Oh, thank you. And it builds on what Celeste was saying. On my nightstand, metaphorically, is the complete series of Bob Caro's look at Lyndon Johnson and the Johnson years. And that series always fascinates me, and I keep coming back to it because we really made change during that period of time. And it was done through leadership that, quite frankly, you wouldn't expect Lyndon Johnson, someone from the Hill Country, to really promote racial integration and expanded opportunity. But he did. I always go back to that period of trying to figure out, can we do it again? What will we need beyond just the leadership to change American government and have it be outward facing instead of inward facing and looking at very small bore issues?
So I think there's a chance my wife is watching this live stream and she's probably laughing because like if you have the Caro series, that takes about this much space. I think I have probably 30 or 40 books stacked up next to the bed. And there's books on pedagogy, there are books by some UVA faculty members who I find their work interesting. But what I'm actually reading mostly these days is actually work on Zen meditation and Zen society. And I think partly what's inspiring this is just seeing, as I'm sure many of you are too, incredible levels of distress among ourselves, among our students, among our peers. And I think if we want to be empowering and equipping the leadership we need to address these hard issues, we really have to invest in understanding ourselves, our minds, how we operate, how we handle stress, how we can achieve peace despite a world full of chaos, right? Because I think among the leadership competencies we need to be developing are people who can deal with unbelievable quantities of data and information all the time, some of it perhaps reliable. You know, a world that is not going to get any less volatile in the coming years, not going to get any less simple. So figuring out how do we equip our students and ourselves to thrive and to pursue human flourishing in this context, I think is one of the greatest challenges we will face. And I think it's the burden for us as educators. Are we preparing the future leadership to be able to cope with this? I think there's a lot of work we all need to do. And this is not just policy schools. This is our full educational system. But that's what's gripping my mind these days.
Well, I'll make a shameless plug and say that I have a new book out, Racial Equity, COVID-19 and Public Policy, the Triple Pandemic. This is actually an edited volume by faculty members in the Wilder School. It does include a foreword by Governor Wilder. And one of the things that happened shortly after the George Floyd murder is that we came together as a school and thought about how can we, through the work of the Wilder School and the disciplines that are there, how can we be a voice in terms of racial equity and public policy? And so the book actually came out in hard copy this week, and looking at criminal justice, economics, and health. And so that was one I'm not so much reading as much as promoting at this point, having been a part of being able to be one of the co-editors with two of my great colleagues. In terms of my personal reading, I'll say one of them is very personal, and that is our daughter recently got married, and she and her husband are both in the Foreign Service in Kuwait. And so I've been reading quite a bit on Kuwait history. I'm reading a book called Veils in the Vanguard. My daughter and I get together usually on Saturday mornings and talk. And so I'm trying to increase my Kuwait knowledge beyond just the Persian Gulf War. So that's where some of my personal reading has been. And then sort of on a spiritual basis, I'm finding myself being more and more drawn to the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount. I'm a Christian, but everybody, whether you're Christian or non-Christian, just looking at the Sermon on the Mount and how that I think gives a great recipe for character, I think is pretty instructive for society. So I found myself ordering more and more books from Amazon and getting different perspectives on that.
Thank you. So, because I kept writing, so I listened to a lot of books. I listened to a lot of books, and I got a badge recently. It's the Dabbler badge because I'm reading so many different books. So I have 7. I'm going to go through them fast. So the first is Making Healthy Places, which is the edited volume that I wrote. It came out last July, and it goes back to this framework of understanding the roots of where you live and how those roots present choices and how those choices lead to healthy or unhealthy outcomes. So fantastic edited volume, and it's absolutely on my nightstand. Second is a book my son wrote. It's called The Infection. And he wrote this during COVID, and so it is absolutely influenced by that and his interest in robots. So it's about a virus that that leads people to get ill, and when they get ill, they become these mammoth-sized robot beings, and how the society copes with that. It's $3.99 on Amazon if anyone's looking for it. The third is The Way of Kings. This is a fiction series by Brandon Sanderson. He's one of my favorite authors, and it's not a fast read. So if you're looking for something to take you through about 6 months, read The Way of Kings. It's fascinating. The fourth is The Power Broker. It's about Bob Moses and his building of New York and Triborough Bridge and the New York park system. And it's really fascinating. It's also one of those very long books. It was recommended to me by a good friend, Keith Lurie. And so I'm getting through it, Keith. And then we'll talk about it over dinner. And then maybe the last two are Hope in the Struggle. Hope in the Struggle is written by Josie Johnson. Josie is a civil rights leader from Minnesota. She was the first African-American Board of Regent at the U, and I call her Mama Josie. And so it's a fascinating, encouraging, motivating book. And then the last is one that was recommended to me by one of my faculty, Tia Gaynor, and that's Rest is Resistance. Rest is Resistance, and it comes out of the NAP Ministries work. So a dabbler.
But these are all IQ. So now we got less than, we got about 10 minutes left, roughly. And we did crowdsource some questions from the Goldman School students. But if we don't get to all of the questions, how will some of these conversations were meaningful for you? But let me get to some of these. So what are some, and anybody can take these, or many of you want, what are some of the challenges and opportunities public schools face in terms of, and you were addressing, of meaningfully teaching students about how to express cultural risk in the current social and political context? And more than what you already shared.
I'll add shortly, briefly, just note that as we approach these questions of challenge in public policy and equity and diversity, we try to ask at the Humphrey School what voices are missing in the readings. So who are we reading? Who are we not reading? So let's take a look at what's invisible. Who are we not reading? What perspectives are missing? And in that process, really making space for reflection. So not only what are you learning, but how are you feeling about it? There's this heart, head, action framework that I use in some of my work. And so how do you feel? Now that you feel that this is important, now your mind is open to acting on it and to engaging and to understanding it. And now that you understand, you can act and do something about it. And so mind, head, action. And then, the other thing I'll note, which is a piece of concern for me, and I'm certain many of us, is that as we navigate difficult conversations, our youth and our broader society, it's not just our kids, we are not resilient when we feel uncomfortable in a conversation. And so instead of pushing through an uncomfortable conversation, we back up and go to what's safe. Jonathan Haidt wrote a book, and there was an Atlantic article, I think in 2015. The book is called The Coddling of the American Mind. And it really talks about this notion of resilience through challenging times. And that is one of the big concerns for me is how can we as a society be resilient such that we can overcome these challenges to democracy, health concerns, political issues, economic challenges, racism. How can we be resilient how can we be resilient?
I just want to add briefly, public education is one of the pillars of democracy. If public education is being weakened by intolerance and narrow-mindedness, then we have to do something about it. And the way to do something about it is to organize. To organize in our communities, organize in our places of worship, organize everywhere. So I see the threat as a challenge. It's an opportunity to renew our democracy. And that's what I'm looking to see, that there are young people at the Goldman School and other schools that take up the mantle and go out and organize us old folks to really get back on the straight and narrow.
Yeah, I'll just add to some of these challenges a political challenge. There are many states that are trying to say, oh, don't teach that and let's take that out of the curriculum, and you can't talk about that. So we're at a moment of book banning going on that is really quite dangerous. And I think all of us in education need to be standing up and saying, no, we are going to tell the truth. We're going to teach. And certainly the University of Virginia, which has a very complicated history, has been working to actually shed a lot more light on what really has happened and who built things and who were the enslavers and who were the enslaved. And I think that's an important part of it. But I think just to build on this resilience point that Nisha talked about, and I think you do take a curriculum and make it far more inclusive of new texts and voices that have been excluded, conversations are much more difficult. A lot of faculty are not actually well prepared and well trained to help facilitate those conversations. So we have work to do to be kind of, helping our people have hard conversations in school. And one of my colleagues at the Batten School that Adam Levy knows, Kirsten Gelsdorf, does a lot of work with the UN, and started something with the UN called Read for Action. And actually it's based on fiction novels around humanitarian affairs issues that people read, but because it's fiction, it's a little easier to deal with it, but it's read for action. So they use the book to inspire people to then commit to certain actions they can take to support humanitarian causes. So I think finding different strategies and innovations that we can, not shy away from hard topics, but also engage them more profitably.
I think the biggest challenge and opportunity that I know that all of us are working in this space, and also many of our colleagues who are not represented on this panel, is to promote the strengthening of our democracy. Not that America has ever been perfect, of course, far from it. But, the erosion of democracy and democratic principles and values is a real threat. And I think that is one of the key areas that all schools of government and public affairs and students and faculty have both a challenge to meet and an opportunity to be a big part in moving democracy forward and realizing the potential of a more perfect union.
Yeah, I really see this threat to democracy as the existential threat of policy schools and the opportunity, because we are essentially teaching students who have seen and witnessed real-time violence to many of the pillars of democracy that we may take for granted. And keeping students inspired, keeping students understanding that it may not always happen at the federal level, but there's also the state and the local level. It may not always be about government. It can also be about the nonprofit sector and the for-profit sector, and presenting students with a much wider buffet of resources and opportunities and places where they can plug in, I think is a really important charge and task and opportunity of policy schools.
I think we are at time, but can we give We can? Okay. Do you have one that you want?
Oh, well, I don't want to take away many of the students that already have.
Okay, then I'll just read the next one on my list. Is there an opportunity, dear Dean, to explore social programs, advocacy, and implementation as a track for the MPP program? I don't even understand the question, so, but I know y'all do.
Well, I'm going to try and interpret it. You know, community organizing for a long time has been anathema or sort of frowned upon in public policy schools. At Cleveland State, at least in my college, what we're trying to do is introduce it piecemeal back into the curriculum. So hopefully in the next few years, it will not be just an add-on or just something that's nice to do, but an important part of how we train public and elected officials to go out and do their work. So I see it as extremely valuable. It just has not been done for the past 20 or so years, just because people feel that, you know, it's just those people hanging against the wall and not being productive. I happen to believe the opposite. You can't have policy without advocacy.
Thank you, Dean Anglin. Anybody else want to?
I was just going to say there is room and space, I think, for some really interesting creativity around that. I love that question. And I think that, you know, at the Ford School, we just had one of our alums, Nikita Brar, came and did a workshop on how to do racial equity assessments within organizations. And we did a policy simulation around that. So we've done policy simulations on everything from how to write a State of the Union address to how to negotiate a really kind of complicated peace accord. And the idea that students were doing a simulation on how do you go into an institution or set of institutions and think about conducting a policy analysis to think about and look at racial equity is that kind of out of the box thinking that I don't know we would have seen, you know, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And I think that all of those things can exist side by side. I think that there's a way in which, as we think about what a comprehensive policy education looks like, that is just another tool in the toolbox. And we marry it with some of the other more kind of traditional tools that you would put into a policy education toolbox.
Very, very quickly. I expect that for all of our schools and for most of us out there, we're going to be going from 2-year based programs to ways to support people throughout careers of public impact and social change, which means that they're critical skills of analysis, but also of leadership, conflict resolution, implementation. So I think all of us to respond to both market pressures and the demands of future leaders are going to need to add a lot more to how we really prepare people to solve these big problems we have. And I'm looking forward to working with this group to do that as well as possible.
And I'll just add that it's not just the topics, whether it's advocacy or anything else, but it's the packaging. So we have the 2-year programs for masters and then the various years for the PhD. Our practitioners need these skills, this training in Q1, in Q2. They can't take 2 years to get it. And so the opportunities that we have, that we're moving forward in all of our schools to train our alum, to train our community members, to give them, to equip them, to educate them, to engage them with the education that they need so they can go right back into work and have impact, is that next iteration that I think you'll see a number of our schools taking if we haven't already done so.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate this time with you. The quality of sharing, the insights. They're motivating for me. It won't make me want to go back and get a degree. I ain't, but it makes me want to. It's in your head.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Please give a round of applause to our panel. Goldman, we take pride in this idea about community and really valuing every opportunity we have to come together, share ideas, and do it for the purpose of building a better future. So this work you're doing is all the hard work of democracy. Our public policy, service, management, affairs, schools are all engaged in building a better future. And I want to thank you for your service and thank you for coming and spending time with us today. Thank you very much. Thank you. There's pizza in the foyer here, and we'll stick around for about 10 minutes for if you got any questions or anything, please feel free. Thank you.